everybody's dead.
It brought in a whole new level of fear. Back then, I had to stop going to funerals. It was just, there were so many. And you can, personally anyways, I can only take so much of that. And I found myself, after a few closer friends had passed away, sinking into a depression. And I just had to stop going to funerals. You know what, it had a horrible impact on the gay community, but at the same time, I think it had a very positive impact on the gay community. I think, again, it caused the gay community to rise up to the challenge of HIV/AIDS, as well as the discrimination and the stigma of it all. And so I think in many ways it strengthened our community, but it was definitely devastating, especially in the 80s. I remember initially people calling it the gay cancer. The doctors didn't know at that time. Nobody really understood it all. Would we be where we are today if it wasn't for the gay community rising up back then? And really rallying and fundraising. It was great to see the community came together, where they would go out on blitzes to all the bars and hand out condoms and little information sheets that helped dispel some of the wrong information, I guess, that people had. The gay community, back then, it was still a very hidden community. And now it's not seen as just a gay men's disease. This is a worldwide problem.
Well, I remember going to dances in the bars, and people saying, well, it's because people are snorting poppers. And so there was a period there where people shunned using poppers, thinking that that's what did it. I played volleyball with Ross Armstrong, yes, because I worked in the hospital, and so when I heard he was admitted and I'd been playing volleyball with him, I went up and visited him and had to gown and glove and sat on the side of his bed and hugged him and said, you know, I'm wearing all this stuff so that I don't introduce any new infection to you, but I'm not afraid of you. The people who died of AIDS, sometimes, well, most of the times, I guess, their faith community had abandoned them a long time ago, and so they weren't going to go back and have any memorial service there. So it was a long and a scary time when people were just dropping. I mean, we almost lost a generation there. I was burying people much younger than I was, and this didn't seem right.
The AIDS epidemic was amongst the gay men. Lesbians generally were quite safe. The women were very much the caregivers, as we often are. I know a lot of women who made themselves available to take care of the guys. I mentioned it was a time of tension too, because for a lot of women, this wasn't our cause. This wasn't something that was really affecting us personally. We love women, and we had a lot of issues to deal with. We still were being discriminated against just being women. Some of us didn't necessarily choose to put a lot of energy into taking care of the guys. And so it created some tension within women's space, within different members.
I watched friends and acquaintances become HIV positive and die within months. Within months. And they would literally turn from a vibrant young 20 or 30 or 40 something man and shrivel up and die. It was really difficult to watch, and it had big impact on me, a big impact on my partner, and certainly on our community. But for me personally, I lost a lot of friends. I'll tell you, when HIV first started breaking, both my boyfriend and I would just watch the news with tremendous interest. We would clip every article from every magazine and every newspaper, looking at each other going, what's happening? Where's this coming from? It is my generation that was the most impacted, because back then, condoms, that's for the straight guys. We don't need to worry about that. We're gay. We learned very quickly that, but not quick enough, that we had to do something, and do something very quickly and very dramatic. And it was, for me, one of the most frustrating political times of my life, because I watched the callous disregard from our world leaders at that time. It was a gay men's disease, and gay men don't matter in our world. And they did not support with funding, they did not support us politically or otherwise. We were left to our own defenses.
July 1st, the first person with AIDS was identified in hospital there in Edmonton, and the 5 of us or 6 of us got together about my round table probably 3 days or 4 days after that and talked about what we would want to do, and it's where Walter and Liz both said we should talk about ourselves as a network. And then in early '85, I think we became registered as a nonprofit association, and I was the chair of the group at that time. And they worked out of my house, actually. And so I'd go off to work, and these guys would come to my place and work. They go home, and I'd come home, kind of thing in that at my place. All of the condoms we had were in boxes in my house. The telephone line was my telephone, and met with some folks that were really concerned, and that were personally. That was the beginning of what we called the AIDS Network of Edmonton.
Yes, I was on the founding board, and that was one of the struggles that we encountered, was that there was a lot of work, huge amount of work going on with the civil rights work, and then when the AIDS crisis came, several of the men in particular were pulled away and started to focus their energy there. So it was a real time of adjustment, because my belief was that if we didn't get the legislation changed, it's like, what's the point?
I don't think anybody knew anybody that didn't have HIV. It was impossible not to know someone that was actively dying. And it was a death sentence then. There was no cocktail, no, it was a death sentence. A horrible, slow death sentence. And I got books of them.
Trying to get pregnant, my donor was a gay man. We were doing it through artificial insemination. And we had to stop because of his health. Then I had to be tested for HIV. With Women's Space, we did work to help spread the word once there was information out there.
You certainly found out who your enemies were the second that there was a health crisis like that. To put it into context, around the same time, have you ever heard of Legionnaire's disease? So a couple of dozen old white men in veterans in the States died, and millions were spent on trying to figure out what killed them. But because of who was dying with the gay cancer, or what it ended up becoming, HIV and AIDS, nobody did anything. AIDS was more than a health problem. It was a political problem, because there's no way anybody could talk about it without talking about sex. Once they figured out it was sexually transmitted, all of us in the queer community knew that these labels of gay and straight and bi are not as cut and dried as the heteronormative world likes to think it is. We knew that there was people who lie about gay sex, who indulge in gay sex and then go back to their straight world. We knew that that was part of our world. And for the people that were saying, well, don't do anything, because eventually they'll all die, and then we'll be done with the problem, we knew that that wasn't going to be the case, because if it was sexually transmitted, that there were men that were playing both sides of both scenes that were going to take it back into the straight world. That's exactly what ended up happening. The government and the health officials, by refusing to do anything about it, actually perpetuated it and created a situation where AIDS became public health enemy number one.
In many ways, as devastating as the HIV/AIDS crisis was and remains, there were good things that came out of that. It brought the community back together in a way it hadn't been for years. It created a need for the community to organize in a way it had never had to organize before. People rose to leadership and advocacy and impassioned about rights and cause, and that this should just not happen. Began to care about their own health care. So there were a lot. I don't believe that if HIV/AIDS crisis hadn't happened, I'm not sure our community would be where it is today, because it changed us as well as a community. I mean, it changed those of us who lived through it. Were changed as people, but the community changed in tremendous ways.